Welcome everybody. It is Business Monday. It's the Small Biz segment here at GoLocal Live at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton. This is Theresa Moore from Tea Time Productions.
Tea Time Productions.
Tea Time Productions. Cool name, nice alliteration. She has it all going on. A little intimidating being here with Theresa. Back in the green room a little while ago, despite her fame and fortune, all starts in East Providence as a townie and a superstar, right? And that's where you get grounded here in Rhode Island. You're doing some pretty innovative stuff, leveraging sort of, can I make the analogy, are you the vice production of education and interactivity and creativity?
That's one way to think about it. I think what we did is we started out as a more traditional media production company, so films, documentaries, and one of our films explored the civil rights movement through the integration of pro football. So we turned it into an app as a way that kids could kind of become engaged with it.
Right.
And then we recognize that some of the offerings that are out there in the textbook and curricula space are just boring and they're, text driven. And we said, why don't we bring this same content into the classroom?
Excellent. And you've done a lot. Let's just start. You've done a lot of documentaries. Did you do one on the Caniglieros?
We were still working on that one on Tony Canigliero, and it was very funny because just this past weekend I was in Tony C's bar, up in Boston.
Right.
But I was friends with his cousin in college, and just that story of a person in their prime and a debilitating injury that they then come back from. We've also done some on Title IX, which I was a huge benefactor of. So being a female athlete, was able to capitalize and use sports to get to college and other opportunities. Third and long. And now we're working on one that looks at the Boston busing crisis through the prism of the Celtics, because the Celtics won the NBA championship the year busing was instituted.
And, we always think of sort of the violent clash of civil rights taking place in Alabama with Bull Connor and attack dogs. But no, just up the road in Boston, it was just about as pretty good when people are spearing each other with American flags.
Right, and we actually used that photo, the soiling of Old Glory, and it won a Pulitzer and also kind of became this reputation for Boston, for a long time.
And still sticks there really today. I mean,
Yep.
really discussion every time about a free agent potentially going to a Boston sports team. Is Boston still racist?
Right.
And then you had the incident last year in the Fenway with one of the Atlanta Braves.
Oh, one of the Braves, yeah. But we also try to show and it was funny because I was a history major in college, and I did my thesis on the busing issue in Boston, but I did it from the Irish perspective, figuring that would be more challenging, as a woman of color. And so while it clearly had racial, elements to it, there was also this socioeconomic component in that
absolutely.
You took kind of the lowest socioeconomic two demographics and had them fighting against each other about where their kids were going to go to school.
Absolutely. So talk about Tea Time. You've gone from a little bit of traditional. There's a lot of folks doing documentaries on wildly interesting stuff, but now you're sort of making it applicable to a younger audience in an educational structure by leveraging really best practices in apps and interactivity. Talk about how you're leveraging technology.
And I think, that's an excellent point. And I think what it is that so many people are talking about how content is great and this is the age of content and all that. But the one place it wasn't going to were schools, and textbooks. And so we said, why is it that
Why would you want great content
Exactly.
to go to school to students, right?
And also, that kids learn in different ways. So some kids are audio driven, some are visually driven, some like multimedia. So we really just recognized that there was this opportunity to have kids engaged and actually liking what they were learning and having it be relevant to them. So how do we connect, Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin and have students make the connection of the similarities and the differences, or Jim Crow laws and the voting ID? So it's really trying to find ways to make kids realize this stuff is interesting if you don't just force them to read it on a plain piece of paper.
And what's been the response from educators, sort of traditional educators? Are they seeing it and understanding it and embracing it, or is there still a little bit of, whoa, That's not the way we do it, and it's not going to help us teach to the test.
Well, I think it kind of goes both ways, and so we do have our content meet the underlying standards of Common Core, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But I think that, with this big personalization movement, the ability to find anything that's going to make the students really engage, people are willing to try. And the other thing is that, as you well know, many of these textbooks are really from the perspective of solely kind of one demographic, primarily white males, and so you have student populations that aren't seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum, and this is a way for them to see different genders, different races, socioeconomic, religions. It's really a way to make people kind of feel engaged because they're seeing someone that looks like them or experiences their community like they do.
Part of the textbook approach is it's just old. I mean, it's not really relevant to any other way that people would learn either in higher education or in the workplace. No one in the workplace gets a giant book their first day, except for maybe here. Poor Bonnie started today, and we gave her this giant book. But other than at a digital media company.
Well, and two things on that, because what happens is then some of the textbooks companies just make their digital offerings a digital version of their book. So the issues in their textbook are still there in their digital offerings. But literally there is some research out there that says sometimes kids are carrying 16 pounds of books home for homework. Like, how is that? Okay, when I lived in New York, you'd see kids with those little, luggage pull things for their textbooks. We're like,
the
there's
good news in Providence is they don't give any homework. we had an editorial the other week at Central High School. Don't hold me to the exact which is which, but proficiency, meaning basic understanding, at Hope High School was 7% for English, 1% for geometry, 2% for algebra. Proficiency does not get you to Harvard.
Well, and I think we're also saying, how do we make it so that these kids really do want to engage in it, so that those scores can grow? And let's find different ways to do it and complement each other so that we can drive those things and also have students really interested in the materials that are in front of them.
So you're disrupting, we've disrupted as a company, we've disrupted media in a lot of ways. We're in our 8th year. You're in your third year. How are you seeing folks adapt to what you're presenting? And are folks at different education systems really understanding what you're talking about? And whether or not they have budget for it, are they embracing the concept of it?
I think they're embracing the concept, and what we explain to people too is that we might not cover as many topics as a textbook does, but we drill down at a level that a textbook doesn't. And what's great is that we are able to do some of our piloting in totally diverse opportunities. So we're getting ready to embark on some work in Barrington where you wouldn't think that the student population is necessarily reflected that way, but if students are going to be global citizens, they need to know about everyone's histories. But then we're also, doing some work with 360 High School to figure out, and in this case, it's math content, saying how do we make math content socially relevant? So we're doing some math curriculum around the school to prison pipeline. We're even looking at law enforcement and saying, are there ways that we can have youth and law enforcement engaging over some content so that their first interaction isn't a negative one?
And you went through the process of getting some funding, a voucher program with Commerce. How was that? Let's just start with how was the process?
The process was great, and I have to give all credit to the Commerce folks because they really.
So we really like when you say that it was a terrible process. Like we want to dig up the dirt. We had somebody on one time open a bar and bookstore over on Valley Street, and they were like, "No, Commerce was great," and then they went about how painful it was dealing with the city of Providence on all their permits. And they're like, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, no, so I think that, what's great is that Commerce is trying to find a way to identify traditional entrepreneurs, but non-traditional entrepreneurs. I think the program is also interesting because it has you engaging with your knowledge providers, so you're dealing with college students and grad students. On one hand, that's great because they're an audience that's very close to the work we're designing, but then you're also dealing with college students, so deadlines and sometimes the concept of deadlines, you're like, okay, we can do this. but they added some great work for us. We added some graphic novel animation and some gamification. So we're excited about what.
And who'd you work with on that?
We work with New England Institute of Technology,
Right.
Steve Kitchen, David Johnson, and just a whole series of students that really came up with some great ideas, and we're committed to it.
And has those projects that you did with New England Tech, have those been monetized?
So they haven't been monetized yet, but what will happen is they will become a part of this Boston busing curriculum, and then we're creating a framework that people can use the framework to have like our content that we've already populated. But if they have some great content and they just want to use the framework, they can, buy the framework and populate it themselves.
So you're doing it as an open source structure.
So it can be an open
leveraged.
source structure, and so people can because people keep saying to us, we're focused on middle school history right now, but people keep saying what about science, what about this, what about that? This gives them an opportunity to put whatever content they want in there, and and really allow the students to have kind of a voice and a piece of the design work.
That's great. What's been the biggest challenges? You're 3 years in. All of us entrepreneurs on any number of instances throw our head into our hands and go, what in God's name are we doing? I will tell you this, the longer it goes on, the less either you make it or you don't.
Yes.
Right? You can't fake it forever.
Exactly.
And that happens less and less.
Yeah.
But what's been some of the challenges?
I think it's, the one that people always talk about is that funding, right?
Yeah.
And particularly for something like our work where it's kind of also socially driven, so you're trying to explain to people that the benefit might just be a student with higher test scores as opposed to, your ROI is 10 times whatever. I think you also mentioned that, sometimes dealing with the districts and schools because there's not continuity on who buys the curriculum in one district, versus another. And then the reality is that these textbooks companies have share of mind. So even though their materials aren't the best, people are trained to, I should go and do this. So it's really trying to break that and say, we are coming at you with a whole new way of learning. It's just as engaging, it's cheaper, the kids are into it. Let's, take a chance with us.
And then when you develop that on that challenge, how do you memorialize that data point that they engage longer, that they retain better? Are you starting to build those metrics as part of your analysis
We
of
do.
the success of each product?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And we actually have teacher dashboards in some of our things.
Nice.
So teachers can actually see in real time how students are doing, how long they're on particular pages. They can also see, is it one student that's not grasping the concept or is it 8 or 9? Because that means then the teacher needs to go back and teach it again. But being able to have those metrics in real time helps a big deal.
So last week it came out that they've developed in China a AI-driven newscaster. I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't.
And you literally just type in the copy and very, very realistically reads it and emotes it and et cetera, et cetera. So hosts here are like, oh my God, I'm going to get replaced by AI. Is there any pushback from schools about, oh my God, we're giving up control? Or I am so, in education, there's such a deficiency of understanding technology that when you talk about some of these things with principals and superintendents and school committees, that it goes whoosh, right by.
Well, and I think realistically, you have people all along the spectrum of how they're using technology,
Right.
and even some people using it for disciplinary things versus kids that are able to go grab their
they've been to
iPad.
electric shock.
Yeah. And so I think, you still have that spectrum that you'll have to figure out. But we also explain to people there's challenges within this new technology. So for example, I went up to the virtual reality lab at Brown.
Yeah.
I'm using it, I'm putzing around the pyramids. I get to Mars and for whatever reason I look down, my hands and legs are an older white male. I said, wow, Mars really is different. I went from a 5'10" black woman to an older, but so the person that designed it didn't do it maliciously, but you shouldn't step into curriculum and have your identity stripped. So even AI, they've talked about facial recognition on darker skin tones.
Right.
So there's still things where we're going to have to figure out some of these issues. Even if the technology is improving, we still have to make sure that it's serving all the students out there.
Successes, we've talked a little bit about challenges. What are some of the successes that you've been able to knock off and build on?
I think, just even having like the NFL use some of our work and having
That
them support
credentialing.
us, that credential. We've got some great pilots going on. The fact that we have gamification and
Right.
graphic novel animation, like the kids, as we've shown it to them, they're like, this is great. So I think that we feel like we're on the right path, and we just have to kind of find those people that understand what we're trying to do, because there's always room for improvement in education, and the sky's the limit with some of these kids if you just give them a chance.
Are you finding enough staffing? We meet with entrepreneurs every Monday, and we have a couple on, and almost universally, the number one challenge everybody says, whether they're a military contract technologist down in Newport, or they're building a consumer product up here in Providence, or they're building something global for the sailing industry, they all say the same thing. My biggest challenge right now is attracting and retaining talent.
I think that is true. I think we've got a little bit of a luxury in that people can be doing our stuff remotely. So right now I had a student that was up at the Harvard grad school that's now working at Google, but still doing curriculum design work for me, and we can just do it over Google,
And you're in
Docs
Kentucky,
or whatever.
You could have somebody all the way over in Central Falls.
Woo, take a road trip,
Right.
So I do think it is truly a concern when you want to be face to face, but we do have the opportunity for some of our work to be not confined geographically.
Great. Other messages you want to get out? What are you hoping to achieve in the next kind of, I hate to say 3 to 5 years, because nobody has any idea what's going to be going on 5 years from now. President Trump will have changed the Constitution, and he'll be in his 3rd term or something, right?
Might not even be here. I think that, we say to people we want to be the Netflix to the Blockbuster, so that we take the same kind of thing, but we do it in such a way that, you make
Complete
the other stuff
disruption.
obsolete and complete disruption. How that plays out, and who are the publishers, because I think there'll be more independent publishers like Tea Time, but it's just getting people to understand that vision now and getting out of the fact that the current model doesn't necessarily work best for students.
Is this where you thought you're 1980s, you're at East Providence High School, split sections then? Did they have the
Split sessions,
Split
yes,
sessions.
until my final year,
Yeah.
and then even being, no. So when people are like, oh, did you always know you want to be in film? I was like, when I became a history major, my father was like, where are we headed on this, hon? He's like, I'm
You're
paying
at
for
Harvard,
Harvard.
and you're going to history?
Exactly. So he was like, so finally, he's like, okay, I finally see. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he's like, I finally see the vision. But no, but I will say that I was always interested in history and these great stories, which is what we feel like our curriculum is telling great stories and having people learn from it.
That's great. Theresa Moore, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me
Congratulations
on.
all
I
of that.
appreciate it.
Keep telling us what's going on. We love continuing the story right along, and
Great.
being a little part of your big success.
Oh, no, I love it. And keep checking us out at Tea Time Productions, t-timeproductions.com. We keep it updated.
Great. We'll be back at 4 o'clock. I will have Gary Sass, the money man, on, talking about what's the state of Rhode Island's economy. And then at 4:30, we'll have Saul Kaplan on from Biff. He's been out in California and Washington, D.C., and doing all sorts of cool things. We'll be talking about everything from what's going on at Amazon to Mark Zuckerberg's little bumps over there at Facebook, and also what's going on at Hasbro here in Rhode Island. See you back at 4 o'clock. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks, everyone.
And we'll see you a little bit later.